Dear viewers, this is round 7 of 8 in the 1957 Formula One World Championship, and today we find ourselves in one of the most extraordinary, demanding, and downright dangerous circuits ever devised for motor racing, the formidable Pescara Grand Prix. Set in the heart of Italy's Abruzzo region, this is not your ordinary racetrack. This is not a ribbon of asphalt coiled inside a stadium. No, this is a full-on expedition through towns, hills, and farmland. The Pescara circuit was carved not from ambition, but from sheer madness. At 25.8 kilometers, yes, that's more than 16 miles, it holds the title as the longest circuit to ever host a Formula One World Championship race. The circuit layout is an enormous triangle etched into the Italian countryside. It begins just outside central Pescara, winding westward through the suburb of Rione Partenze, and then climbs into the hillside villages of Frascone, Valle Carbone, Spoltore, and Case Fornace. Here, drivers are hurled through a mix of high-speed corners and tightening bends, often flanked by stone walls and front gardens. No runoff, no margin for error, just raw bravery. Now picture this, a 5.5-kilometer dead-straight blast through the town of Montesilvano. That's 3.5 miles of flat-out speed, just slightly shorter than the infamous Mulsanne Straight at Le Mans. And not once, but twice in every lap. It's here that Guy Moll tragically lost his life in 1934, and the name Flying Kilometer has remained ever since. It wasn't built for speed, it was simply what was available. Bumpy, narrow, uneven, ruthless. Even Enzo Ferrari himself refused to send his cars to race here in earlier years, citing the unacceptable danger to his drivers. In fact, this was the first Formula One circuit to introduce an artificial chicane, a makeshift kink installed in 1934 on the long start-finish straight, purely to slow cars down before they reached the pits at full chat. Safety in those days was often improvised, and rarely enough. The Pescara Grand Prix has a long and storied past. First run in 1924 as the Coppa Acerbo, the event continued in various forms through the decades. Several non-championship Formula One races were held here in the early 1950s, but 1957 marked its only official appearance on the World Championship calendar. This, ladies and gentlemen, is Pescara, the longest circuit in Formula One history, a cathedral of speed, a relic of a wilder age. And today, it will once again test the courage, endurance, and brilliance of the world's greatest drivers. Despite their crowning achievement in Germany, the Modena-based squad arrived at their home Grand Prix with the same hunger, the same intensity, and perhaps even greater ambition. Juan Manuel Fangio arrived in Pescara not as a man under pressure, but as a 5-time world champion. The title was secured. The history books had already been rewritten, but if anyone thought Maserati would now rest on its laurels, they were sorely mistaken. Behind Fangio stood a familiar supporting cast: Jean Bera, the tenacious Frenchman with a brave heart and a short fuse; Harry Schell, the amiable American with no shortage of speed; and Italy's own Giorgio Scarlatti, hoping to make an impression in front of the home crowd. But the real intrigue lay in the machinery. Alongside their familiar and famously light 6-cylinder 250Fs, Maserati unveiled something rather special in Pescara, an experimental 12-cylinder machine developed in utmost secrecy. With a projected 310 horsepower under its bonnet, this prototype was designed with one clear objective: to devour the monstrous straights of the Pescara circuit. And what straights they were! Nearly 11 kilometers of flat-out running per lap, more than enough tarmac for the 12-cylinder engine to stretch its legs, and potentially deliver a knockout punch to the competition. This was a gamble, certainly. New machines bring new questions, and reliability was always a concern when pushing the boundaries of power and engineering. But if there was ever a venue to roll the dice, it was here. Having already seen their championship hopes evaporate under the Nürburgring sun, Scuderia Ferrari arrived at Pescara not with fire in their belly, but with fresh bruises on their pride. The Ferrari 801, noble as it was in lineage, had struggled all season to match the might of Maserati's lighter, sharper machines. During the short break between the German and Italian rounds, Enzo Ferrari himself, the famously fiery and immovable Commendatore, found time to engage in a very public spat with both the Italian government and the Automobile Club of Italy. Pending the investigation for the deaths of 11 people at Mille Miglia earlier that year, Enzo Ferrari was prosecuted on 11 counts of manslaughter. He stated that Ferrari would not compete in Pescara. Shock swept through the tifosi. No Ferrari at their home race? Impossible. But then, just days before the event, the clouds parted. In classic Ferrari fashion, the Commendatore had a change of heart, or perhaps simply decided to remind everyone that he could come and go as he pleased. Either way, Scuderia Ferrari would indeed appear at Pescara, but not in force. No grand four-car lineup, no great cavalry charge, just one lone warrior, Luigi Musso, entrusted with the only Ferrari 801 to take the grid. The Van Wall squad, true to recent form, arrived in Pescara with its now familiar trio of drivers, Stirling Moss, Tony Brooks, and the ever-improving Stuart Lewis Evans. 3 Britons, 3 green machines, and 1 burning ambition to carry the Union Jack to victory on Italian soil. If Maserati came with momentum and Ferrari with flair, then Van Wall came with focus. In the intervening fortnight, the Van Wall engineers rolled up their sleeves and turned their full attention to one particular weakness: the handling. For Pescara, all 3 cars were fitted with newly developed shock absorbers, a significant refinement aimed at ironing out the unpredictable feedback that had troubled drivers at the ring. 3 drivers, 3 Van Walls, and a growing sense that the British team, still relatively young in the world of Formula One, might just be on the verge of something historic. The final factory team to join the grid for the Pescara Grand Prix was none other than the ever-innovative Cooper Car Company. The small British outfit, still very much a David among Goliaths, brought along 2 of their featherweight rear-engined Formula 2 machines, driven, as in previous rounds, by the determined Jack Brabham and the ever-game Roy Salvadori. Rear-engined, compact and astonishingly nimble, these curious little machines were still considered something of a novelty in the paddock. At over 25 kilometers per lap, Pescara was no ordinary circuit. Most drivers, confronted by the absurdity of warm-up or cool-down laps at such a scale, decided to simply run their flying laps and then come to a halt, whereupon mechanics, ever dutiful, would trundle down the road to push them back to the pits like glorified wheelbarrows. Yet despite the circus atmosphere, the qualifying battle at the sharp end was anything but comedic. And once again, it was the Argentinian maestro who delivered. Calm, composed, and seemingly fused with the road beneath him, Fangio unleashed a lap time so astonishing that it left even seasoned observers blinking in disbelief. He clocked in over 10 seconds faster than his nearest challenger, an immense margin by any standard, let alone a single lap. That closest rival was none other than Stirling Moss. After the Van Wall's comparatively lackluster showing at the Nürburgring, this result marked clear and measurable progress. The car was quicker, the handling crisper, and Moss, ever the realist, knew the race would be long and punishing. Ferrari's hopes rested squarely on Luigi Musso's shoulders, and to the delight of the tifosi, he didn't disappoint. Flying solo for the Scuderia, Musso pushed his Ferrari 801 to its limits on the coastal straights and narrow village lanes, securing 3rd on the grid. Behind them, Maserati's Gianbera and Harry Schell locked out the 2nd row, though their paths to those positions were far from smooth. Further down, the independent Scuderia Centro Sud continued to punch above their weight. Maston Gregory and Joe Bonnier, both driving year-old Maserati machinery, put in polished performances, securing 7th and 9th respectively. And at the very rear, bringing up the field, were the Coopers. Jack Brabham and Roy Salvadori had made miracles happen earlier in the year, with their nimble rear-engined F2 cars. But Pescara was a different beast. The massive straights punished their modest engines. The result was inevitable. The two little machines would start from the back, outgunned and outpaced.
Cari tifosi, che splendida domenica qui a Pescara! Il sole splende alto, la brezza dell'Adriatico accarezza le tribune e nell'aria, il profumo inconfondibile di parrotto appena sfornato e benzina da corsa. Cosa potremmo desiderare di più?
Ladies and gentlemen, we are just moments away from the start of one of the most grueling tests in the history of Formula One. 18 laps may not sound like much, but around this monstrous road circuit, it means 460 kilometers, nearly 300 miles of relentless corners, searing heat, and narrow public roads. The drivers are strapped in, the machines are ready. Ahead lies perhaps the most punishing Grand Prix of the season.
Signora tifosi, da Spoltore al mare, dalle curve in collina ai rettilinei infiniti, fatevi sentire, che lo sentano i motori, che lo senta il mondo intero. Il settimo Gran Premio del campionato mondiale di Formula 1 1957 parte ora!
At the wave of the Italian flag, the grid bursts to life, and to the delight of the tifosi, it's Luigi Musso who takes the early lead, blasting past both Moss and Fangio into the first few corners. Sterling Moss holds second in the van wall, tucked in closely, while Fangio, ever the strategist, settles into third, playing the long game. But on the very next lap, Sterling Moss, ever the tactician, had seen enough. He'd quietly studied every twitch and turn of Musso's Ferrari, and when the moment came, he struck. Moss slipped past the Scarlet Machine and took the lead of the race, becoming the new frontrunner through the dusty lanes of Pescara. Stuart Lewis Evans, holding steady in fifth place, suddenly finds himself in a spot of trouble. His rear tire begins to delaminate, shredding apart with alarming speed. With no choice but to back off, he coaxes the van wall back to the pits for a fresh set of rubber. It's a swift service from the crew, but even the sharpest pit work can't mask the cost of an unscheduled stop this early in the race. By the time he rejoins, Lewis Evans has plummeted down the order, well out of contention. On lap 3, deep in the rear guard of the field, Roy Salvadori and Jack Brabham seemed determined to find some excitement of their own. Trading places and pushing their little Coopers to the edge, the duel might have lifted their spirits, but it ended in tears for Salvadori. Under pressure, he pushed just a fraction too hard, lost control, and spun off the road with a dramatic puff of dust. The result? Bent wheels, a battered suspension, and a quiet retirement from the race. By lap 4, Sterling Moss begins to demonstrate. The Van Wall man now begins to stretch his legs. By the time the lap ends, the gap to Musso has opened up to 6 full seconds. On lap 5, disaster strikes for John Behra. The Frenchman, pushing hard in his Maserati, begins to suffer from a critical mechanical issue, a crack in the oil line. There's nothing Behra can do. He's forced to pull off the road and retire from the Grand Prix. Two Americans locked in battle for 4th place. Now that's something you don't see every day in Formula One. Harry Schell, the sharp and stylish New Yorker in the works Maserati, is eyeing the tailpipes of Marston Gregory, the Kansas City Flash, driving for Scuderia Centro Sud. Gregory's doing a fine job keeping Schell at bay, but you get the sense the factory Maserati has just a little more in reserve. Schell was simply quicker. With that, the works Maserati slides into 4th. It's moments like these that remind us of the 1972 South African Grand Prix at Kyalami, when Peter Revson and Mario Andretti locked horns in a battle for the ages. But nowadays, American drivers are a rare breed in Formula One, not like in the 50s, when men like Schell and Gregory regularly brought stars and stripes bravado to Europe's greatest circuits. Meanwhile, back in 3rd place, and nearly a full minute adrift, cruises Juan Manuel Fangio. The reigning 5-time world champion seems utterly unbothered by the pace up front. He's already proven once again that he owns this circuit, delivering a time in qualifying that bordered on the ridiculous. But now, he's taking a different approach. There's no rush, no points to chase, no titles left to prove, just the warm Italian sun, the winding Abruzzo hills, and a Maserati purring beneath him. A gentleman's cruise, if ever there was one. On lap 9, Joe Bonnier's Maserati, already working overtime under the scorching Italian sun, begins to show signs of distress. The relentless heat and the brutal demands of the Pescara circuit take their toll, and soon plumes of steam rise from the exhaust, a clear sign that all is not well under the bonnet. Despite the Swede's best efforts to nurse it along, the temperature gauge keeps climbing. The engine is cooked. Bonnier pulls off and retires from the race, another victim of Pescara's punishing mix of distance, elevation, and heat. Just one lap later, disaster strikes again, and this time, it's heartbreak for the home crowd. Luigi Musso, holding a solid second place and carrying all of Italy's hopes on his shoulders, begins to feel something amiss. The Ferrari, already pushed to its limits on Pescara's brutal straights. The engine, tortured by heat and distance, finally gives up the ghost. With no choice, Musso coasts to a halt. His race is over, and so are Ferrari's hopes for a home soil comeback. A few moments later, misfortune strikes again, this time for Halford. Running steadily in 7th place, the British privateer had been doing a respectable job keeping his Maserati in the mix. The transmission, already under immense stress from the repeated high-speed runs, finally gives way. Halford tries to nurse it along, but the car refuses to cooperate. Forced to the roadside, his Grand Prix is over. The Pescara circuit continues its merciless assault, exposing every weakness in man and machine alike. On lap 12, it's Chico Godia who falls victim to the relentless challenge. A sudden puff of smoke signals disaster. Moments later, the engine lets go entirely, coughing its last breath before falling silent. Godia coasts to the side of the road, his race done, another casualty claimed by this monstrous circuit. Stirling Moss, the British ace, is driving with the ease of a man out for a Sunday jaunt, and on lap 13, over 3 minutes ahead of Juan Manuel Fangio, decides it's time for a little pause, not out of necessity, but simply because he can. The stop is smooth and unhurried, a rare luxury in Grand Prix racing. Moments later, Moss is back out on track, still in the lead and still in complete control. It's the kind of dominance that makes you forget just how brutal this race really is. Giorgio Scarlatti, who had been holding a respectable 5th place, begins to struggle. First, it's the engine, laboring up the hills, coughing on the straights. Then the clutch starts to slip, making gear changes a torturous affair. The signs are all too clear. The car is waving the white flag. A frustrating end after a solid performance, but on this track, even 5th place feels like a triumph. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, the curtain falls on a truly unforgettable day at Pescara. Stirling Moss, after a textbook drive that blended sheer pace with cool-headed strategy, crosses the finish line first, securing Van Wall's 2nd Grand Prix victory of the season. A monumental result, not just for the British ace, but for the entire Van Wall outfit, who've now cemented themselves as serious players on the global stage. Fangio, he crosses the line in 2nd, more than 3 minutes adrift of Moss. The maestro must concede this time. The day belonged to the Englishman. Yet even in defeat, the Argentine's performance was solid and assured. Another well-earned podium for the reigning champion and for Maserati. Finishing 3rd, and doing so with style, is Fangio's teammate, Harry Schell. The American didn't have the sharpest getaway, but once he settled into rhythm, he carved through the field with authority. It's his first ever podium in Formula One, long overdue and well-deserved. Perhaps Nico Hülkenberg knows the feeling, after finally stepping onto the rostrum at the 2025 British Grand Prix. Fourth place goes to another American, Marston Gregory. Quietly consistent all afternoon, Gregory once again shows maturity beyond his years and adds another strong result to his growing resume. Fifth place? That goes to Stuart Lewis Evans. On the final lap, he manages to reel in Scarlatti's limping Maserati and snatches the last points position. A classic case of never giving up paying dividends. And just when you thought this story was over, enter Jack Brabham. Running dead last on the final lap, the Australian's Cooper sputters to a halt. The Australian driver parks his car right next to a gas station, just a few hundred meters from the finish line. In a moment worthy of cinema, the local petrol station attendant spots Brabham stranded beside the pumps. Without missing a beat, the kind-hearted Italian jogs over with a jerry can, pours a few precious liters into the Cooper, and sends Jack on his way, with a firm handshake and a grin. Brabham restarts the car, rumbles across the line, and bags 7th place. Not a point, no glory, but what a story. Only in Pescara. 7 finishes, 460 kilometers of public roads, countless retirements, and one very lucky petrol station. This, dear viewers, was motor racing at its rawest and most romantic. As we've seen today, Stirling Moss has leapfrogged into 2nd place in the championship with a truly commanding victory. And it must be said, Ferrari's pointless weekend certainly played its part in that shuffle. But make no mistake, the battle is far from over. With just 1 round left in the season, 4 drivers are still mathematically in contention for the runner-up spot in the World Championship. And where will this final showdown take place? Yes, dear viewers, brace yourselves. We're heading back to the land madness, the Autodromo Nazionale di Monza. The Tifosi are already preparing their flags, horns, and legendary vocal cords, ready to outshout the engines, or at least give it a proper go. They usually do. It's passion, it's chaos, it's Monza. The grand finale is nearly upon us. Oh, Italy, what a place to race.